Hey, this is John Adamson, the rehab documentation guru, sitting outside, excuse me, a Starbucks in Ashland, Virginia, which is self-proclaiming itself to be the center of the universe. There's a sign actually that is in town that says that. What I want to do today is talk about high complexity evaluations for PTs and OTs. As you know, for the last year and a half, as of the making of this video, PTs and OTs have had the option to do low, moderate, or high complexity evaluations. And one of the things that Medicare is tracking is the use of these evaluation codes, as well as the time that's being spent, and of course, the content of the evaluation. As you already know, if you've been using these codes, there are 4 key elements to proving the medical necessity of a high complexity evaluation. Number 1 is basically the complexities, comorbidities, personal factors of the patient. And for a high complexity eval, you have to have 3 or more. And then you also have to demonstrate clinical findings. And if you've been to my course, you've heard me talk about functional deficits and underlying impairments. Those are basically your clinical findings. They have to do with body regions, they are measurements, and you have to have 4 or more. Then there's 2 other criteria. One is called the clinical decision making. So how much clinical decision making went into the determination of that evaluation code. You have low, moderate, and high complexity of that within the complexity code itself. And that one is a little bit more up to the therapist, but they should demonstrate it with their documentation. And then finally, it's whether the patient is stable, evolving, or unstable in their clinical presentation. And your eval should prove that. I want to go back to complexities of the patient, comorbidities, complexities, personal factors, having 4 or more. I'm sorry, 3 or more. So with that, you're going to be probably choosing a primary medical diagnosis for your claim. And so that'll be 1 complexity. And then maybe you're choosing at least one, perhaps more, treatment diagnoses, and that will be another complexity. So now we're up to 2. And so you really need to think about coding as many as possible codes, diagnostic codes, ICD-10s, to help prove the complexity. But along with that, your documentation needs to support what the complexity is and why it's tied into your patient. And if you've been to my course, you've heard me talk about this, but one of the ways we show a comorbidity or a complexity is actually impacting this claim is by having underlying impairments or functional deficit measures to support that. So if you have a patient who has a recent stroke but also has atrial fibrillation and is on a AFib med, and while you're doing evaluation, they're getting very wiped out, but their heart rate is not increasing significantly because they've got medication controlling it. Well, that's impacting. It's impacting their cardiovascular status during the eval. So that's definitely an impactful comorbidity, as long as we have the measurements to back it up. The other thing that we talked about is measurements. And the more objective measurements you have, the better off you are in supporting that high complexity. Of course, you have to have 4 or more, and really you should probably emphasize on the more. And the underlying impairments, like objectifying, let's say, strength, range of motion, balance, coordination, those are really important to supporting that high complexity. The other thing you might want to consider doing to back those up is using standardized tests, and not just a standardized test, but putting in the test, the score, and the interpretation, breaking down that score that demonstrates a higher level, notice the use of that word higher, of complexity in your evaluation to support that high complexity. Now let's talk about stability of the patient, whether they are stable, evolving, or unstable. Really, that's going to be partly your clinical decision making, where they're at on that continuum, but you got to be able to back it up with actually objective and or subjective findings. So If every little thing you do with a patient, let's say, exacerbates their pain, well, that might be an unstable patient, and you would just want to document carefully what that's like. If everything you do is causing drastic changes in their blood pressure readings, well, that's possibly a factor contributing to instability of the patient's medical status. So you want to prove that through your documentation. So you probably have seen a trend, and that is objectify everything. If you want to prove you are billing truly a high complexity eval, then you have to be hitting on all cylinders with this. Finally, and I say this mostly to those that are billing low, moderate, and high in a Part A inpatient setting, bill the actual minutes of evaluation. So many entities, I'll just put it that way, would like you to bill minimal evaluation minutes to make sure you're capturing what is truly productive time. However, your eval minutes should justify the evaluation complexity that you're doing. So it's unlikely, and Medicare knows this, that if you build a high complexity eval, it took you 15 minutes to do that eval. It's likely you're padding your treatment minutes with what should have been true evaluation time. So make sure that you're billing accurately. This will be less of a red flag when it comes to audits of your documentation. Anyway, appreciate you tuning in. Sorry for the background noise, but I am sitting outside on this cloudy and relatively warm but pleasant day. Again, this is John Adamson, the Rehab Documentation Guru. Please like and subscribe if you find my content to be helpful. And also, please go ahead and contact me with any comments that you might have. And anyway, I'm not making any money from these videos, but if you're interested in consulting me, my email is adamsonenterprises, the number 1, at gmail.com, adamsonenterprises1 at gmail.com. Thank you so much, and you take care.